Previously on Ecco the Dolphin. A bottlenose dolphin, in an effort to save his family, tracked down the oldest living creature in the sea, the asteroid, who is about to send him to Atlantis so he can use a time machine. No, you're not high. That really happened. Time for a complete change of scenery. The levels are basically structured the same way, but instead of being in underwater caves and such, you're inside the remains of old ancient Rome-style buildings that have long since sunken into the water. So yeah, Atlantis. Also, if you jump out of the water, you're treated to this beautiful sunset. I think the Atlantis levels might be my favorite visually. Instead of having to use a falling rock to help you go against the current, you use a block. Instead of having to destroy a barricade of shells to progress, you destroy chains to progress. The blocks can also behave the way shells did in the previous levels, and sometimes you need one to destroy a chain. Here's an amusing bug. You can hear the sound of a chain being destroyed over and over. Because I left the block where the chain is supposed to go, and the chain keeps trying to respawn, only to be destroyed immediately. Always when it's just off screen. So yeah, stuff works the same way, it just looks different. Also, it looks like the cold water enemies are back. Fortunately, there aren't as many as in the earlier cold water levels. So now we're in the library where we can access glyphs that will tell us the backstory and reveal exactly what happened to the sea life in the eye of the storm. Are you ready for this shit? Brace yourselves, I'm not even kidding. We are losing a war with the planet Vortex. I mean, we already had time travel in our Dolphin game, may as well add space aliens too. So Atlanteans were from the future, and they went back into the past to escape an attack by the Vortex. The second glyph explains what glyphs are, showing us that they were made by the Atlanteans, created to help a dolphin of the future travel to Vortex. The third glyph explains what and where the planet Vortex is. I like this. Note, the nearest constellation to Pegasus is Delphinus. That's actually true. I looked it up real quick out of curiosity since I'd never heard of that constellation. Nice detail. And in fact, those dots are showing the Delphinus constellation, which is the same as the marks on Echo's head. I actually never caught that before now. That is amazing. The fourth glyph talks about the Vortex and how the Atlanteans suspect that they're dying and can no longer produce food. Every 500 years, when the Earth and Vortex have a clear path, the Vortex feed upon the Earth, taking more each time as they get hungrier. The fifth glyph is a message for Echo specifically, saying that they left the glyphs for him to find. The sixth is a repeat of the first one for some reason. The seventh is a reiteration about the Vortex feeding on the seas of Earth, and eventually there will be nothing left. All life will end. The Vortex must be stopped. And the eighth is a copy of the second explaining what glyphs are. Not sure why that's there, but okay. Oh, and remember how I talked about what a pain it can be to jump over little islands? Try jumping over this high wall, because you have to progress. Fortunately, it's a one-time thing, you don't have to go back. I don't want to talk about how long it took me to realize that these nude male statues were actually glyphs. Most of them were just temporary invisibility anyway. But this one unlocks a shortcut. So what does the time machine look like? A pair of giant speakers because they utilize sound waves and are activated by a dolphin's echolocation. That's so damn cool. So now we're in just after the dinosaur age. Not that any of the creatures we're gonna see belong in this time period, but this is where we supposedly are. The underwater caves are very rocky looking and covered in fossils. There are underwater volcanoes that you would think would make the water unbearably hot, but apparently not. They do look cool though. There's even a glyph hiding in one. Speaking of which, for some reason the glyphs really like to hide in this area. The first enemies we encounter are the shark stand-ins, which look a bit like eels, but with huge nasty looking teeth. Turns out it's called Dunkleosteus, and yeah, this is pretty much how it looked. Creepy. There are also prehistoric jellyfish, these neat-looking squids with cone-shaped shells, which are kind of replacing stingrays. And these goddamn trilobites, which are replacing the crabs. Again, they're just this static image that moves over to you and hovers around you until you're dead. It'd be funny if they weren't so annoying. Speaking of annoying, I noticed that these damn spiky plants are timeless. Oh, and look, there's even a current that pushes me into one that's really hard to swim through. Awesome. However, Ecco does have one friend here. The pteranodons are really helpful for some reason. You get the song to call them from a glyph, and they'll pick you up and carry you to the next area. Kinda looks like he's supplying the background music too. Oh, and there's kind of a boss-like enemy along the lines of the octopus from earlier, only this one is a gigantic fucking seahorse. That's kind of terrifying. If it makes you feel any better, there were no giant prehistoric seahorses. They have always been tiny, and haven't been around all that long. When I attack it, I'm either inadvertently releasing its babies, or it's shooting its babies at me as projectiles. I choose to believe it's the latter.
Avenge me, my children.
I think he's just mad because everyone says he looks like a duck. For the last level of the prehistoric area, my favorite song, the one originally used for the Undercaves, is playing again. Appropriate since a boss battle is coming up, and this intense music is perfect for that. Oh, you can get crushed again in this area, this time by shells. I actually used save states here on top of every other way I was cheating. I hate instant death, especially when it's something that doesn't make sense, like shells moving on their own with so much force they can crush you against a wall. Fuck that. Honestly, I didn't have to kill this giant seahorse, I was just in a bad mood. So here's that boss fight I mentioned. The asteroid immediately attacks Ecco, I guess because it doesn't recognize him. So what you're doing here is you're stealing one of its globes so you can give it to the present-day asteroid. But, oh god, this hurts my brain. I guess we're going by Red Dwarf time travel logic, where it doesn't really need to make sense. If they made a third Genesis game, maybe we would have found out that Ecco was his own dad. Anyway, you need to attack the same color of globe about 4 times. Once you do, Ecco immediately gets sent back to the present. Thank God, no more prehistoric levels. So the next 3 levels are repeats of previous ones. First we have to go back to deep water, where present-day asteroid is waiting to get his missing globe back. So Ecco returns the globe, and the asteroid, at full power now, grants him a couple of new abilities. Since the only thing Ecco can't do in this game is space travel, he needs to go back to the time machine and use it to go back to the moment when the vortex sucked all the sea life out of the water. So asteroid gives Ecco the song to use on the time machine so it'll take him there. The asteroid doesn't mention it, but Ecco now legitimately doesn't need to breathe. So it's back to Atlantis and the time machine, which takes you back to home bay. And then once again you have to jump into the air, which triggers the storm cutscene. Only this time you get sucked up with the rest of the sea life. Yes, the last 3 levels of this game actually take place where no dolphin has gone before. I warned you this game was gonna get weird.
Fear the tube.
Well, here's another thing that Ecco has in common with Abadox. They both have a tube of death. So, for the first time in this game, we have that kind of level where the screen scrolls on its own and you have to keep up with it or you'll get crushed against the side of the screen. Or, in this case, bottom. I've never been a fan of that kind of mechanic. I always thought it seemed cheap and weirdly fourth wall breaking. Like in every other level, you can safely assume that there's more space beyond the side of the screen that you can't see until you move there. But in this one level, the side of the screen is a literal invisible wall. It's not just Ecco either. I also hated those kinds of levels in Mario 3, and why is it even a thing in Altered Beast? Your character is just walking. What does he need to keep up with? At least with the other two, you're flying or being sucked through a tube, so a certain lack of control on your part makes sense. But I digress. On the upside, you can destroy any of these objects with just one hit, including these platform-looking structures, so that kind of helps. You also have machines that come after you and bolts of electricity to deal with. Not to mention that everything gradually speeds up more and more toward the end. I did manage to beat this one using a liberal amount of save states. This is a freaking cakewalk compared to the next level, though.
Welcome to the machine!
Why yes, the name of this level is a Pink Floyd reference. In fact, it's another scrolling level. What it comes down to is that, assuming you don't die, these levels both run for a specific amount of time. According to the developer, if you started up Pink Floyd's Welcome to the Machine right when the tube started, the song would end at the same time as the end of the machine level. Also, the music in the game in general is apparently Pink Floyd inspired. Anyway, same idea as the tube, only this time the direction of the scrolling changes, and instead of being in a simple structure, you're basically in a maze where you have to predict where things will end up whenever the scrolling changes. You basically have to memorize the entire thing through trial and error. It's bullshit. We finally get to see the enemy though, and they look very much like xenomorphs, with 4 arms and a tail instead of legs, and generally even more bug-like. You also have to hit them twice to kill them. The first hit separates the head from the body, but the head continues to come after you until you destroy the head. This level does look great though. Even aside from how the vortex drones look, the mechanical details look very H.R. Geiger inspired. Yes, I know it's supposed to be Giger, I'm just used to saying Geiger, deal with it. And that's just such a big change from how the earlier levels looked. This whole game looks amazing, but I love how it captures both the beautiful simplicity of nature and the complex inner workings of an alien spaceship with equal attention to detail. The creepy music is also a nice touch. It's also interesting to note that the Vortex are apparently sea creatures as well, since you're able to swim through their environment, even though they look like they're floating. Some kind of animation showing how they propel themselves would have been interesting. Oh, and in the spirit of being honest about how difficult these levels are, even with invincibility and liberal use of save states, I eventually gave up on this one. Holy hell, the difficulty level here is just nuts. I love this bit where it tricks you into going into this tube. Oh, and you can't go into that tube either. If you can make it through this game without any cheats, I genuinely salute you, because I just don't have the skill or patience. So are you ready for the final boss? I'll answer for you, you're not. Uh-oh, the Undercave's music is back. That's how you know the game means business. Speaking of which, if you die here, the game throws you back to the beginning of the machine. So much bullshit. The Japanese version made it a little easier by having a shorter level for you to go through called the stomach. It looks like it's made of pieces from the tube with some of the machine thrown in. The most important part though is that it doesn't scroll, so the mechanics feel more like an earlier level. There are plenty of spots where you could get crushed though. So what is the final boss of this game? I present to you the Vortex Queen. I'll give you a moment to take this all in. So how do you beat her? Well, the short version is that you pummel the shit out of her until she dies. Remember how the earlier levels were underwater exploration and it felt more like a dolphin simulator? Now we're gouging the eyes out of a giant xenomorph head. What even is this game? So after you freaking blind her, you then have to ram into her jaw, eventually breaking it off, but it grows back twice. Meanwhile, she periodically sucks in food and you have to stay away from that or you end up as a snack. The sight of her crunching down on Ecco is pretty horrific. Kind of reminds me of Sinistar. We only see jellyfish go into her mouth, but wouldn't it be messed up if we saw her eating dolphins? I guess in the original timeline, before we went back, she probably ate all of Ecco's family. Best case scenario is that they suffocated before being eaten alive since there's no air. There's some fridge horror for you. And what is life like for the Vortex Queen? She's just a floating head that does nothing but feed and reproduce. The Vortex would have to be intelligent if they built this spaceship. Is she self-aware? Am I doing her a favor by killing her? Okay, this is getting weird. Let's end it. Speaking of horrific, how about the Vortex Queen's head floating around with no eyes and no jaw? Yikes. After that, it just takes a couple more hits and then she's done. Well, I guess she did eat Ecco's family because now she's throwing them up. The other timeline is still darker. Now that our family is safe, it's back to home bay for the final time. The game is playing itself at this point. I love that when Ecco comes back, the first thing he does is celebrate by just being a dolphin. That's right, I'm amazing. You better. Oh, you just had to go there, didn't you? And now we get treated to happy dolphin dances. Aww. The end. This game is weird and wonderful. It starts off as a harmless dolphin simulator type thing, and the next thing you know, you're playing as Ecco the time-traveling alien-fighting dolphin. I definitely have the debug code to thank for my experiencing a lot more of this game than I would have otherwise. In fact, there's a feature where you can go through all of the messages in the game, and the first time I used it, during a time when I think I hadn't even quite gotten up to the blue whale yet, I read a random message that turned out to be, "Do you think the Vortex are really destroyed?" I was like, what? And I think that was what inspired me to keep playing to find out where this game was really going. This is just how I approach some games. I do try to play it legitimately, but if it turns out to be well outside my skill level, and I like everything else about it, I'll use cheat codes to get through it just so I can experience the rest of the game in some way. Hell, these days a lot of people experience games through other people's Let's Plays. I'm not judging, I'd be a hypocrite if I did, but at the very least it's no worse than that. Fun fact about the reason for the difficulty, though. Ecco the Dolphin came out during the time when renting games was a thing, and kids were renting games and beating them over the weekend and returning them instead of actually buying them, which was not the best thing for video game companies. So Ecco was made to be a very long and difficult game that you would pretty much have to buy if you wanted to play all the way through it. Speaking of buying games, Ecco was one of the Genesis games to have an enhanced version released on Sega CD. Honestly, it didn't add much. From what I can tell, the graphics look the same. Mostly the difference is in the sound. The splash when you land in the water is more realistic sounding. One thing I don't like is that they completely redid the music. And I would be fine if they just did covers of the original songs in better quality sound or whatever, but they didn't even keep the original tunes, so the music is completely different. Not that it's bad, it's great, actually. I probably wouldn't complain if I had never played the Genesis version, but I really miss that Undercave's music. Although I do kind of understand why they did it. Having a different soundtrack to set it apart from the Genesis version might make people who already own the Genesis version more likely to get the Sega CD version. There's also an FMV in the beginning, which looks amazing, but I don't like how it starts off in space. That's kind of foreshadowing the Vortex, and I don't like that idea. It does add one thing to the gameplay, though. If you die, you actually get the chance to continue instead of having to restart the level. Imagine that. Oh, and when you beat the game, you get to see this. But if you own a Sega CD and you're a completionist or you're really into Ecco, I wouldn't necessarily tell you not to get it, but I wouldn't say that you'd be missing much if you didn't either. But anyway, since this is a more traditional game den, in the vein of Golden Axe and Abadox, let's take a look at the box art. And just like Golden Axe 2, it's a painting by Boris Vallejo. Though there isn't really that much to say. His artwork looks great as always, but it's a fairly standard design for what you'd expect from a game called Ecco the Dolphin. The only thing I don't like is how the stars on his head are 5-pointed stars like you'd see on a flag. I prefer the title screen where they look more like diamond shapes. It's a little more believable. It doesn't look like someone came along with a stencil and a can of spray paint. I'll say a little more about the box art once I get to the sequel, since I prefer that one but don't want to talk about it until I cover that game. So I realize I'm not saying much about behind-the-scenes stuff regarding the game, and that's because other people have done that, and I wanted to focus mostly on the game itself, though I may get into that more when I get to the sequel eventually. By the way, Ecco the Tides of Time is an amazing game, and as good as this game is, that one blows this one out of the water in nearly every way possible. But that's a conversation for another video, and I am glad I took the time to take a look at Ecco the Dolphin. It's definitely unique, and if you've never played it or haven't played it in a long time, maybe this video will inspire you to give it a shot. That's it for now. See you next time.
"お前はもう死んでいる。